What happens when Japan and America mix? Two things. Nuclear warfare. Scratch that, it's not warfare, it's nuclear domination. And two, Mitsubishi and Dodge/Chrysler collaborations. Probably the greatest gift to mankind ever formed. Now today specifically, we are not talking about the collaboration you are probably thinking of, which is the 3000 GT/3000 GT VR4 or Dodge Stealth. What we are talking about is something a little bit more retro, a little bit more cool, a little bit more pop-up headlight, a little bit more rear-wheel drive. Today we are talking about the Mitsubishi Starion or the Chrysler Conquest. Depending on where you're at, it's going to be a lot harder to find one or the other. But before we get into all of that, let's talk about some basic facts. The Mitsubishi Starion was produced from 1981 to 1989. And know when I say Starion, it's also interchangeable for the Chrysler Conquest. But I will be using Starion for the majority of this video, so deal with it. Now, the engines that came in these cars were actually a little bit unique, despite the fact that the bodies and suspension and everything else being nearly identical. It had two standard engine options. It had a G63B and it had a G54B. Now the G63B was a 2-liter turbo that came with an intercooler in the Japanese and more domestic region markets. And then America got a 2.6-liter G54B with a turbo and intercooler, and that came to America sadly because we never get the cool stuff, I feel like, because the G63B, if you are a spec sheet nerd, you are familiar with that engine as it shares a lot of parts with the Mitsubishi freaking Evo in a car that's from the 80s that partnered with Dodge. You do not get Evo tax on this car. You just get retro and 80s swag and respect. No Evo tax. It's such a cool car. This car has pop-up headlights, electronically actuated and adjusted suspension, digital gauge clusters. Most of those options I just listed are optional, but they existed. It has a standard rear-wheel drive layout, standard 5-speed manual transmission. It also has the super gay option if you didn't know how to drive.
Oh yeah.
For a 4-speed automatic. But unless you don't know how to drive, that shouldn't be a problem that you have to deal with. This car is not the most powerful. The G63Bs have about 194 horsepower in the top end highly optioned forms, and the Chrysler Conquest with the G56B or G54B, excuse me, has about 188 horsepower in the high option models. Now there are 3 basic trim levels. There is the base level, there is the ES/LS, depending on, I think, the region you're at, and then there's the ESIR or the TSI. Depending on where you're at. So the base model is just base, not a whole lot of options. The ES/LS, depending on how you spec it, comes with some of that digital gauge cluster goodness, adjustable suspension, all sorts of goodies. But then there's the really cool cars. There's the ESIRs or the TSIs. Basically, these have upgraded engines, upgraded performance, upgraded suspension and tires, and from factory, they came with a wide body. They came wide bodied from factory. How cool is that? Man, I wish that car companies would still take risks and do weird, quirky, fun things like this today. Sadly, they're all too focused on making a cheap buck off hybrid and electrification that is incentivized by the government. Do not buy them. Let's make strike and make them make us manual combustion engines. Anyways, moving on from my little rant, I do apologize. This car was not only quirky on the spec sheets, but it was also mildly successful in racing. Even though it only had 130 horsepower in the production version, this car was still used by Mitsubishi Racing to compete in multiple leagues. However, when Mitsubishi Group B Racing wanted to make a rally version, they decided the rear-wheel drive format would not work, so they developed an all-wheel drive format. or they tried, because by the time that they were nearing completion of the project, Mitsubishi decided to cancel Group B racing, therefore canceling the project. So we never got to see the Mitsubishi Starion compete in rally racing, which I think would have been kind of funny, but it would have looked so cool to see this car racing and jumping through the dirt. However, the Mitsubishi Starion did get a chance to shine in the spotlight in Mitsubishi Group A racing in the touring class, and they won several competitions. So it had some mild success in that field, which is kind of cool. Like, shout out to Mitsubishi in America for getting along and kind of creating something kind of cool. Something that made a lasting impact. This car was kind of like immediately adopted by tuners, but at the same time it was just as quickly forgotten by most people obsessed with clout these days. However, for the tuners that are familiar with it, especially the 4G63B engines, they saw massive potential in them because, like I said, they share parts with the Evo. And with that rear-wheel drive 5-speed manual setup and the amazing suspension that they tried to incorporate into this car, it made a great platform for tuners that's not too overly saturated, but also not impossible to find support for. It also now has a cult following. However, it has not affected prices pretty much at all. They've kind of stayed right around the same price for forever. I do think eventually, as these cars get more recognition, they will go up in value, however. And I never say cars are an investment, so you did not hear it from me, but I think this is a smart purchase option for you. I want this car. I don't think I want it badly enough to spend how much you have to spend on this car, if that makes sense. So this car costs around $10,000 to $15,000 for a base model. In America, you're really just looking at a Chrysler Conquest, just because the Mitsubishi Starions are so rare. But at the end of the day, it doesn't make that much of a difference. However, I would really like that 4G63B engine. So if you could find a Mitsubishi Starion in the US, though it's a hard task, definitely do it. If you're dedicated enough, you can always import. I don't really know if it's worth it at that point, because at just a little bit more, from $19,000 to $25,000, you can find the Mitsubishi ESI-R or the Chrysler Conquest TSI, which have the factory wide body and is by all means considered a much more collectible piece and a much more sought after piece. It's a very cool car. It's a very unique car. Not a whole lot of cars in history have been truly wide bodied from factory. Like, some trucks would be like, wide body, cool wide body, and it's just like plastic fender flares. But this car was truly wide bodied from factory, and it's just so dope to see. And you don't see that on a lot of cars, which is why this car is more expensive, but it also has increased suspension performance and engine performance. And so if you can find one of those and are willing to spend that much on a 45-year-old car, then by all means do it. Follow your dreams. I think it's a really cool car, and I think it's definitely definitely worth, where did I get Noth from? Definitely worth noting. If you guys want to see more cool historic cars like this, you can subscribe. However, I'm not going to ask you to, because I know that I'm a nobody and hard to listen to right now. So to change that, if you guys could just leave me comments on how I can make my videos better for you, whether it's the content, the flow, the styling, whatever it is, maybe the content itself, the kind of videos I'm doing, leave it all below. I want to hear all of your suggestions on how I can make this better for you, because I'm doing this for you. And I'm never going to stop doing this for you, so just tell me what you want, because I can't read your mind, especially through the internet. So please let me know what you guys are thinking. If you guys have any suggestions on different style videos you want, or on other cars you want me to review, please let me know down below. I love you all so much. Thank you for joining me today. If you guys are new, welcome. If you guys are returning, welcome. And I want you all to stay blessed.